What is up, awesome peeps? Brent McCluskey here with Electrified Reviews, and today we are going over the Addmotor Moton M150 P7 folding electric bike. This is another dope bike from Addmotor. It's got a top speed of 25 miles per hour with the throttle. It has cadence sensing pedal assist. It has a 750 watt hub motor here in the back. It's got a pretty big 48 volt, 11.5 amp hour battery here in the middle, and it has front suspension with 100 millimeters of travel. This bike also has an integrated front headlight and a very expansive control center right up here on the handlebars. It's also got huge 4-inch tires, which are great for going through mud, snow, stuff like that. We're gonna dive into this bike, talk about the specs, talk about the pros and the cons, but first things first, let's roll the opener. This has been another pretty cool bike to test and review and just ride around. Right off the bat, I love the color scheme of the orange and the black. Just the orange battery, the orange fenders, the orange accents with the black frame. Just looks really sweet in my opinion. A lot of cool stuff to talk about with this bike, but of course, to start things off, let's talk about the power. Powering the M150 P7 is a 750 watt hub motor here in the back. So this thing is a hub motor, and the last bike we talked about from Addmotor was a mid-drive motor. A little bit different, still gives you a lot of power. This thing has 80 Newton meters of torque, which is pretty good. Remember the other bike that we just reviewed from Addmotor, the M5800, had 160 Newton meters of torque. So this one is not as powerful, but again, this is a smaller electric bike. It's not really meant for powering through these huge hills like the other one. That being said, 750 watts of power is still pretty dang powerful. With this bike, I was able to get up almost any hill I was wanting to tackle, even with just the throttle alone without pedaling. Of course, if you do pedal, it just makes it even more powerful and allows you to go other places you wouldn't be able to go if you were only using the throttle. All right, power is down. Next up, let's talk about the speed. The M150 P7 has a top speed of 25 miles per hour with the throttle, or a top speed of 20 miles per hour with the pedal assist. So with this thing, again, 750 watts of power, I was able to reach the top speed of 25 miles per hour pretty easily with this thing, which is a pretty cool feat given the fact that I weigh around 200 pounds. So for you guys who might be lighter riders, you probably will be able to hit this speed even easier, or hit that speed going up even steeper hills than I was. I also love this thing has a throttle which you can use to hit that top speed of 25 miles per hour, because it just means this bike can fill more purposes than if it didn't have a throttle. You can use it as a traditional bike without the power, you can use it with the pedal assist, or you can use it like a moped or a scooter and only use the throttle to get around town. Now, I do want to mention though that like the M5800 we reviewed recently, this bike has a top speed of 25 miles per hour, which means it's going to be a class 3 electric bike. So depending on where you guys are located, this may or may not be legal to drive around on the road. So you're definitely going to want to check with your local laws to see if this is something you can take on the bike path, on the sidewalk, or if you need to keep it on private property or an OHV park. Moving right along, let's talk about specs. The M150 is made from aluminum alloy, but even still, this bike weighs in pretty heavy at about 60.7 pounds, which is quite a bit for a folding electric bike, something that's this small. Of course, we do have those huge 4-inch tires on there, we do have front suspension, and we've got that larger than average capacity battery of 11.5 amp hours. So even still, not that bad. This bike has a total length of 67.5 inches, a width of 23 inches, a reach of 25.5 inches, and a standover height of about 25 inches. Now, the folded dimensions of this bike is about 49.5 inches in length, 16 inches in width, and about 29.5 inches in height. Folding the M150 P7 is also pretty easy and only requires basically 2 simple steps. There's a latch up here on the handlebars, which you have to undo, a latch on the middle of the frame, and once those are undone, you can fold this bike in half, fold the handlebars down, and if you want to make it even a little bit thinner, you can also undo this latch right here on the top of the handlebars, and that'll give you just a little bit more leeway to twist these handlebars around to find that perfect angle so it fits in the tightest spots possible. Up on the front of the bike, we have the Tektro brake levers, which lead down to the 160mm front and rear mechanical disc brakes. They also lead down to the rear Shimano Tourney derailleur. This is a 7-speed electric bike. And what's great about these brakes is they have motor inhibitors built in. So whenever you depress the brake levers, it's going to shut off power to the motor, which is great for emergency stopping situations, especially since this bike has a throttle. It's easy to forget to let off the throttle or even sometimes to stop pedaling in an emergency situation. But what's great about the motor inhibitors is whenever you hit these brake levers, the motor shuts off and it basically ensures that you're going to have the shortest possible stopping distance. Up here on the top of the handlebars, we have the control center, pretty similar to the M5800 we just reviewed recently. This thing still has all the pertinent information you really could want from a control center. You've got your top speed, current speed, tripometer, odometer, how much battery you have left, what level of pedal assist you're in. It's also backlit, and it allows you to control the headlamp, which is located in the front. And you can also hit walk mode by holding down on the button pad on the left here, which is cool if you want to just walk this bike beside you, if you want to walk it up a hill. And you can hold the top button and the power button to activate the front light and to deactivate the front light. On the left-hand side of the handlebars, we have the control center and a flick bell. So the location of this bell is actually pretty cool. It's kind of tucked in between the handlebars themselves and the brake lever. So it's not on the handlebars themselves, which I like because personally, when bells are on the handlebars, I just think it's not as aesthetically pleasing. It kind of just messes up the flow of things. I dig they put it up here where they did. Now the M150 P7 also has a telescoping handlebar, so it allows you to really raise this thing up to give you the perfect height for various size riders. Nice feature. Up here on the front of the bike, we have the Mozo 100mm suspension with preload adjust and lockout. So the lockout can be used to basically make the suspension dead. It makes it so the suspension does not have any travel in there, and that's great if you're going on roads where you don't need suspension and you want to just increase your efficiency overall. The preload adjuster is great for making the suspension more or less stiff depending on what kind of terrain you're tackling and how heavy each individual rider is. Also on the front of this bike, we have this integrated headlamp, which is awesome. It feeds right into the battery and the button pad up here like I was talking about, so you can actually activate this headlamp from the control center as opposed to having to push a button on the front of it to turn it on and off. And it's actually a pretty bright light. It does a good job of illuminating your path at night, so you can actually use this thing to ride at night, and it's not just a not very bright light to let people see that you're there, just to increase visibility. It's actually pretty functional. And then of course we've got these beautiful orange fenders. I really dig these fenders, guys. Not just the color, but the fact that they are steel as opposed to plastic. So having steel fenders comes with a little bit of advantages. It's basically going to make them rattle around a lot less than if they were plastic fenders. Now the only downside to having steel fenders is if they get scratched, they can rust over time. And then at the very bottom of this bike, we got these massive 4-inch tires, just like the ones on the M5800 we reviewed recently. These tires are nice and wide, 20 inches tall. Basically, these are great for riding through snow, mud, sand, whatever. They just give you a bunch of traction, and because they've got a pretty high air volume, especially for a smaller folding bike, it just gives you a little bit extra suspension, a little bit extra cushion while you're riding. Now, on a lot of folding electric bikes, they tuck the battery into the frame here, but on the M150 P7, the battery is actually located right here in the rear of the bike. So this is cool personally because I just love the orange accent. I think it looks really good. And again, the battery here is a 48 volt, 11.5 amp hour battery. Pretty high capacity, should give you around 25 miles or so of range, depending on how you ride this thing, how much you weigh, stuff like that. But I like the color of this battery. I love the orange and black accents. It just looks great all around. Now, the only downside to having the battery here in the back as opposed to actually in the frame is it's going to be a little bit back heavy, especially with the motor located in the back of the bike as well. So that basically means carrying this thing around might not be quite as easy as if the battery was actually inside of the frame. Now on the flip side, it seems like Admotor kind of already thought of that, and they put a handle that's built right into the frame here. So you can use this piece right here in the middle to just grab this bike, pick it up, and it makes it a lot easier to carry around as opposed to if there wasn't a handle here and you just had to kind of find a spot to grab this thing and pick it up by. At the very bottom of the M150 P7, we've got this little metal bracket that's used to stand this bike up when it's folded. And something that's great about this bike in particular is the way that it's balanced is you can use this metal bracket to set this bike down and it will stay upright when you leave it. A lot of folding bikes, you fold them up and you think, oh, it's great, I could leave it sitting here, leave it around, whatever, but the thing will tip over if you don't actually sit there and hold it upright. But with this bike, put it down, leave it, it's good to go. On the right-hand side, you've also got a chain ring and a chain guide, which helps keep that chain locked into place while you're riding. Now, this thing is made out of plastic, so it could be vulnerable to breaking if you actually do get a rock strike or a log strike, whatever, a strike of any kind on the chain ring. It might break, but it probably should be fine. Now, this bike is a cadence sensor as opposed to a torque sensor, and as you guys probably know by now, I always prefer to have a torque sensor, but this thing does get the job done. The only downside to having a cadence sensor is it's not going to be as accurate at starting and stopping power from the motor as a torque sensor. Of course, because this bike has a throttle, you can kind of circumvent that. You can get around that delay by just hitting the throttle as soon as you start pedaling as well. And at the back of the bike, we have the other fender, which is great, orange, love it. And we've got that 750 watt motor tucked into the rear wheel here. And again, this is a hub motor as opposed to a mid-drive motor like we saw on the M5800. Another little feature about this bike that may seem small, but it's actually pretty cool, is it has folding pedals. So when you are in a really tight spot, you're trying to store this thing in your garage, whatever, you can fold this thing up and you can fold the pedals in, which just gives you a little bit more room to squeeze this thing into super tight spots. All right, peeps, we've talked about the specs, we've talked about the power, the speed. Now it's time to talk about the pros and the cons and some things I'd like to see done differently in future models. Pro number one for this bike has to be just the looks. Aesthetically, this bike, I'm really jiving with it. The orange and the black, it's much better than I thought it would be in the pictures. In real life, this thing really pops. It's a huge head turner, and visually, this bike is definitely something that is right up my alley. For the second pro, I'm going with the headlamp. Now, normally with most electric bikes that have headlamps, they really don't do a good job of actually illuminating your path, but this light is relatively bright. I can actually see where I'm going at night, and I love the fact that it does tie right into the battery and the button pad on the left-hand side of the handlebars here, so I can turn it on and off with the press of a button. And pro number three is going to be the tires. Now again, just like the tires on the M5800, these things are 4 inches wide. Of course, they're a lot shorter, only 20 inches tall. But these extra wide tires, they just do a great job of giving a lot of traction on soft terrain, again, snow, sand, mud, water, stuff like that. And because they have a higher than average volume of air inside these things, they kind of act as like a separate little suspension system, which is dope. Next up for the pros has to be the speed. 25 miles per hour for a folding bike is pretty good, especially with a motor that's 750 watts of power. It allows you to really get up to that speed with the throttle up here on the handlebars. I like that this thing goes that fast and that you can actually hit the top speed. Next up for the pros, I'm throwing the fenders up there. Again, the orange, love it, but the fact that they're steel too, it just means they're not going to rattle around. They're going to be more durable, probably over time. But again, the one thing I will mention about steel fenders one last time is if you do scratch them, just be careful because they can rust. And the last pro I'm throwing up there is going to be the price. So at $1,600, I think this bike is relatively affordable, and you do get a pretty powerful motor that comes along with it. You get a pretty large battery at that 11.5 amp hour mark. You get front suspension, like you get a pretty fair amount. It's a pretty good value buy, I feel like, at $1,600. So throwing that in the pros. All right, peeps, we have talked about the pros, but of course, like every product, there are going to be cons. So let's talk about the cons. Probably the biggest con for me for this bike is going to be the lack of balance. So again, we've got this battery here in the back and we've got the motor in the back. So that just means that this thing really is very back heavy. And if you've got a backpack on as well, it just adds more weight to the very back of this bike. It could make for a little bit of squirreliness if you're going really fast. And just overall, like carrying this thing around, it does feel a little unbalanced. For con number two, I'm going with, I don't know what to call it, but it's this little piece on the handlebar. So the handlebar folds and articulates in a couple of different points. We've got a spot down here towards the front where the handlebar folds down. We've got the spot on the stem, the quick release, so the handlebar can telescope. And we've also got this spot on the top of the handlebars so that the handlebars themselves can rotate. Now, the only thing I don't like about this one little piece right here is that it kind of sticks out a little bit too far, in my opinion. I don't think it's a safety issue, but I could just foresee stopping really hard, maybe going forward on the handlebars, and this thing just poking me in the chest. I don't know. I don't think it's a huge deal, but I am going to throw it up there in the cons anyways. And for con number 3, I'm going with no tail light. I just feel like this bike has a pretty good headlight integrated into the battery system. It would be really cool to see in future models maybe a tail light that goes on here as well that also feeds right into the battery. You can control it with the same push of a button to turn on the front headlight, and maybe even adding like a brake light in there as well, so when you depress the brake levers it shows that you are actually coming to a stop. Is it the end of the world that this bike doesn't have a tail light? Not really. I mean, it does come with a detachable battery powered tail light, so there is that. And for the last con for the M150 P7, I'm going with weight. Now, overall, again, this thing weighs 60.7 pounds, which is just kind of heavy for a folding electric bike. Granted, we do have the suspension in the front, we do have a pretty big motor in the back, and we've got this big battery, but still, it would be nice if they would find a way to lower this weight to around 55, 53 pounds, somewhere like that. All right, awesome peeps, we have talked about the pros, the cons, we've covered the specs. Now let's talk about who this bike is really for. Obviously, like all folding bikes, this is great for anybody who is really short on space or who might want to use this thing to actually travel. So this is a great bike to throw in the back of your car, fold it up, throw it in your garage. You can even take it with you to the office, fold it up once you get there. Just the fact that it folds makes it, you can bring this thing to a lot of other places that you might not be able to with other full-size bikes. Also, because of the 4-inch wide tires, this is kind of a unique folding bike in my opinion. It just means that this bike can travel more terrain types than the average folding bike that might have regular size tires like 2.25, 2.5 inches, whatever. The extra wide tires here just means that you have a lot more traction on really spongy, soft terrain like sand, snow, stuff like that. And it just means that this thing could be really cool for the beach. Maybe if you're up in like Lake Tahoe or just like whatever kind of area with a bunch of snow, stuff like that, this bike would fit that bill really well. And then finally, I think this bike is great for people who just want to have fun. I mean, it's a pretty affordable electric bike at $1,600. It comes with a fair amount of already upgraded features, this bigger battery, the bigger motor, front suspension, so it's a good value buy, and the fact that it has a throttle means that you really can use this thing as like a little moped to get around town if you don't want to pedal at all. All in all, this was a really cool bike to test out and ride. I hope you guys dug this video. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. If you have any recommendations or any other reviews you'd like to see on electric bikes, electric scooters, electric skateboards, leave that in the comments as well, and I'll get back to you guys as quickly as possible. So thank you again so much for watching. Have a great day, and peace